The darkness of death was suddenly shattered by the blinding glare of a crystal chandelier. I felt my lungs gasping for air as I gripped the silk sheets with trembling hands. Looking into a nearby silver mirror, I didn't see the face of the overworked office worker I once was. Instead, the reflection of Alan Palacio, the legendary incompetent trash of the game, Psychedelia, stared back at me. I knew this character well because he was destined to be the first to die when the game's story began. I quickly calculated the current date and realized I had exactly 10 years until the world's total destruction. The end of the world was not a metaphor in this game. It was a programmed certainty involving the 5 sins. These 5 individuals were the harbingers of doom who would eventually tear the continent apart in their madness. If I wanted to live a long and lazy life as a noble, I had to stop them from ever becoming monsters. The plan was simple: find these future catastrophes while they were still children and reform them. My first target was Eudia, the girl who would eventually become the Witch of Eternal Night. Right now, she was just an orphan starving in the slums of the capital city. I summoned my head butler and ordered him to prepare a carriage for an immediate departure. The butler looked puzzled, as the original Elaine never left the mansion except to cause trouble. I maintained a cold exterior, hiding my internal panic behind a mask of noble indifference. As we traveled through the city, I saw the divide between the glittering noble district and the decaying slums. The stench of the lower city hit me like a physical wall as I stepped out of the carriage. I followed the memory of the game's lore, navigating through the labyrinthine streets. Finally, I found a small crate hidden behind a pile of broken barrels. Inside was the shivering form of Eudia, her eyes filled with a primal predatory fear. She was clutching a piece of stale bread, as if it were her last connection to life. I reached out my hand and offered her a warm, gold-wrapped chocolate from my pocket. She didn't take it immediately, her instincts warning her that nobles never gave anything for free. "Come with me, and you will never be hungry again," I whispered, my voice smooth and calm. The lure of food and warmth was too strong, and she tentatively reached for the chocolate. I had successfully secured the first of the 5 sins, preventing the rise of the Witch of Night. Back at the mansion, I instructed the maids to bathe and clothe her without asking questions. My next goal was Dios, the boy who would become the Sword of Bloodshed. He was currently a slave, in an illegal underground arena, forced to fight for his life every night. I didn't have the combat power to fight, but I had the Palacio family's bottomless wealth. The slave trader's eyes bulged as he saw more gold than he would earn in a lifetime. I walked away with the boy's contract in my hand, leaving the trader stunned by my generosity. Within a week, I had collected 2 of the most dangerous children in history and brought them under my roof. I felt a sense of accomplishment, believing I had successfully neutralized the biggest threats to my lazy life. However, I failed to notice the way Eutia and Deos looked at me when I wasn't watching. They didn't see me as a lazy noble who wanted to sleep all day, they saw a savior who had descended from heaven. I began to give them vague advice about growing strong and being useful, hoping they would become good knights. Little did I know, they were interpreting my every word as a coded instruction for world conquest. One night, I found a strange symbol drawn in blood on the floor of the children's playroom. When I asked them about it, they simply smiled and said they were forming a club to protect my peace. A sudden chill ran down my spine as I realized my Reformation project might be taking a very dark turn. At that moment, a secret messenger arrived with a letter sealed in black wax. The letter informed me that a mysterious group had already begun systematically eliminating my political rivals in the capital. The name of this new terrifying organization was the Blue Moon, a name I had mentioned once in a casual story. I turned to look at the children, but they were gone, leaving only the scent of ozone and shadows behind. I stared at the empty space where the children had stood, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the lingering scent of ozone and the cold touch of shifting shadows. I retreated to my study, the plush rug muffling my footsteps as I tried to regain my composure. If I was going to survive the next 10 years, I couldn't afford to let my emotions dictate my movements. I pulled a sheet of parchment toward me, the inkwell waiting like a dark, silent eye. I needed to send a message to Eutia, something to soothe the trauma of her time at the Human Testing Center. I recalled an old incantation from the game, a sequence of words said to calm the volatile blood of her clan. To me, it was just a string of polite nonsense and a bit of everyday venting about my annoying brothers. I sealed the letter with wax, the Palacio crest pressing firmly into the red pool. Evan, my loyal knight, appeared at the door as if summoned by the very act of finishing the letter. I handed him the missive, instructing him to deliver it to the orphanage without delay. I told him the matter must remain secret, my lack of facial expression making the request seem far more ominous than intended. Far away, in the dim light of the orphanage, Utia broke the seal with trembling fingers. As her eyes scanned my words, the air around her began to vibrate with an overwhelming surge of mana. She didn't see a friendly letter, she saw a blueprint for a new world order, disguised in a master's code. Her anger flared briefly at the realization that I wasn't calling her to my side immediately. But then she remembered my excuse that it wasn't the right time and interpreted it as a test of her loyalty. She whispered my name as if it were a prayer to the great moon hanging in the night sky. Back at the estate, I was blissfully unaware of her transformation, focusing instead on finding my next target. My peace was shattered when the study door was nearly kicked off its hinges by my second brother, Tonio. Tonio sneered at me, mocking my literacy and my useless status as an illegitimate son. I chose to kneel, hiding my contempt behind a mask of obedience, while he basked in his perceived superiority. A dagger hissed through the air, narrowly missing Tonio's head and embedding itself in the doorframe. Leo, my eldest brother, stood in the hallway with a cold smile, the scent of drugs and blood following him like a shroud. As they began to argue over the family succession, I took the opportunity to slip away with Evan. We had more important matters to attend to, specifically the rescue of the second sin, Deus Melon. I ordered Evan to treat the boy with the utmost kindness, knowing his future was forged in slavery and abuse. Again, I used the same excuse that the time for a personal meeting hadn't yet arrived. At the orphanage, Deus sat alone, his body covered in the scars of his past and his eyes vacant of hope. Utia approached him that night, her presence carrying the weight of a queen rather than a child. She spoke of the great moon and the destiny that awaited those chosen by his hand. Under her influence, Deus began to feel a vast, cold energy stirring within his broken spirit. The news of Tonio's sudden death from an accidental fall reached me while I was searching for the third boss. The story settings were changing in the game. Leo was supposed to kill Tonio much later. At the funeral, I watched my father surround himself with women and drugs, showing no grief for his fallen son. A year passed in a blur of magic research and my growing correspondence with Utia. I noticed the orphanage was attracting more sponsors, but I dismissed it as a fortunate turn for the children. That night, at a drug distribution site called Margot, two men found themselves unable to move their own bodies. They were puppets in a theater of death, their own blades turning toward their throats under a master's invisible pull. A cloaked figure stepped into the light, revealing Deus, whose eyes were as cold as the moon above. Utia stood beside him, watching the scene with a smile that carried the weight of a bloody revolution. She claimed this was the will of that person, the architect who moved the world from the shadows. Back in my room, I shivered as a sudden gust of wind blew my research notes across the floor. I felt as though 1,000 eyes were watching me from the dark, waiting for a command I didn't even know I had given. Evan burst into the room, his face pale and his breathing ragged as he delivered the news I dreaded most. "Master," he whispered, "the capital is burning, and they are chanting your name under a blood-red moon." The messenger's words hung in the air like a cold mist as Evan looked at Alan with genuine confusion. Elaine gripped his teacup tightly, wondering how the simple act of sending letters had led to talk of burning capitals. He retreated into his own thoughts, desperately trying to recall the exact phrasing of the encouragement letters he had sent to the orphanage. In his mind, he had only told Utia to manage things well so she wouldn't become a monster, yet the world seemed to have interpreted it as a declaration of war. Deciding that more power was the only way to ensure his safety, Alan turned his full attention back to the ancient scrolls of magic research. He began tracing the intricate mana circuits required for advanced gravity manipulation, a skill he hoped would be his ultimate defense. Meanwhile, miles away in a hidden base, Utia stood before a gathering of cloaked figures under the light of the full moon. She held Elaine's latest letter as if it were a sacred scripture, her voice ringing out with fanatic conviction. "Our master has spoken through these riddles," she declared to the group, "and he demands we cleanse the filth of the underworld." Dio stepped forward from the shadows, his eyes reflecting the cold light of the moon as he adjusted his new armor. He had interpreted Alan's request to be diligent as an order to leave no survivors in the upcoming purge. That night, the Blue Moon Organization officially began its first major operation against the criminal syndicates of the East. In the heart of the city's slums, a drug distribution site was suddenly engulfed in a silent, magical pressure. The thugs inside barely had time to scream before the puppet strings of Deus took control of their limbs. Under the invisible command of the Blue Moon, the criminals were forced to turn their blades upon one another. Utia watched the massacre from a high rafter, her expression as calm as a saint witnessing a miracle. "This is for the Great Moon's peaceful future," she whispered to herself, clutching a small charm Alan had once gifted her. Back at the Palacio estate, Alan finally finished his research, his eyes bloodshot from hours of intense study. He felt a small surge of pride, believing he had mastered a new level of mana control that would keep him safe from any threat. Little did he know that while he slept, his name was being carved into the cobblestones of the underworld in blood. Days later, news of the mysterious Blue Moon group began to spread through the capital like wildfire. The Palacio family's servants began to whisper as well, noticing the strange letters that arrived for Alan every month. Evan entered the study with a stack of reports, his face more grim than usual as he looked at his master. "Young master," Evan started, "the underworld organizations are disappearing, and they say a mastermind is controlling it from the shadows." Alan simply laughed it off, assuming Evan was just relaying the exaggerated rumors of some rival noble family's power struggle. "The world is a scary place, Evan," Alan said. "That is why we must stay right here and focus on our tea." Far to the south, Rin, another of the sponsored children, was busy infiltrating a corrupt merchant's manor. She moved with the silent grace of a predator, her goal to reclaim the funds Alan had mentioned were necessary for the future. Each piece of gold stolen was, in her mind, a direct contribution to the grand plan her savior had designed. By the time the sun rose, the merchant's wealth was gone, and a blue moon was painted on his vault door. Alan, meanwhile, was experiencing his first breakthrough in combining sigils with his gravity spells. He watched as the rock shattered under the pressure of his mana, unaware that he was using a technique long forgotten by the modern towers. A sudden gust of wind blew a piece of charred paper into the garden, catching Alan's attention. He saw a fragment of a symbol, a crescent moon, and wondered if one of his brothers was playing a prank. Shrugging it off, he tossed the scrap aside, deciding that he had more important things to worry about, like his upcoming bath. While Alan prepared for luxury, the Blue Moon leaders gathered once more to report their progress to Utia. "The underworld of the East is nearly ours," Dios reported, his voice devoid of all emotion. Utia nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of a new map she had drawn based on Alan's vague descriptions of the world. "We must move faster," she commanded, "for the Master's patience is thin, and the true enemy is yet to reveal themselves." As she spoke, a dark, pulsing aura began to leak from the corners of the room, sensing the growing power of the children. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the Palacio mansion, pulling Alan from his peaceful slumber. He looked out the window to see his eldest brother's carriage engulfed in blue flames, a sight he had never seen in the game. Amidst the chaos, a single cloaked figure stood atop the gate, holding a banner that shimmered under the blue moon. Alan's heart pounded against his ribs as he realized his peaceful, noble life was crumbling before it even truly began. As the figure pointed its blade toward his window, Alan saw a familiar wooden charm dangling from the hilt, and his blood ran cold. Alan stared at the wooden charm through the glass, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He recognized that carving immediately as the same one he had given to a starving orphan years ago. The shadow outside the window vanished into the night before he could even call for a guard. Realizing the world was moving faster than his plans, Alan decided he needed the Aegis core from the Labyrinth of Whispers immediately. He packed his bags in secret, hoping to slip away before his overzealous servants noticed his departure. Alan boarded a common carriage, disguised in a heavy brown hood to hide his noble features. High above on a jagged cliffside, Udia watched the carriage roll down the dusty path with reverent eyes. She believed her master was moving in secret to initiate the next phase of the Great Cleansing. Alan arrived at the entrance of the labyrinth, a gaping stone maw etched with ancient, glowing runes. He found the entrance unguarded, unaware that Dios had already silenced the monsters in the perimeter. Within the first hour, Alan tripped over a loose stone and tumbled down a steep embankment. Hidden in the shadows above, a Blue Moon operative gasped at Alan's seemingly intentional descent into the lower levels. The operative whispered into a communication crystal that the master had found a secret shortcut through the terrain. Alan dusted off his pants, cursing his lack of physical coordination while checking his bruised knee. A giant earth spider descended from the ceiling, its many eyes reflecting Alan's terrified face. He threw a random explosive magic circle at the wall, hoping to create a distraction for his escape. The explosion caused a ceiling collapse that crushed the spider instantly while leaving Alan untouched. Utia, observing from a ventilation shaft, marveled at how her master could calculate such a precise structural collapse. Elaine walked deeper, wondering why the labyrinth seemed so much easier than the game's description suggested. He stopped by a fountain to drink, accidentally triggering a hidden pressure plate with his foot. Instead of a trap, the wall slid open to reveal a cache of legendary potions and gold. He quickly stuffed the potions into his bag, thinking he was the luckiest man alive. Dios watched from the rafters, convinced that Alan was demonstrating the importance of environmental awareness. Elaine finally reached the central chamber where the Aegis core rested upon a floating pedestal. A gargantuan stone golem rumbled to life, guarding the artifact with a massive slab of granite for a hand. Elaine fumbled with his mana revolver, accidentally dropping a high-grade mana crystal onto the floor. The crystal rolled into a groove in the floor, activating a dormant defense turret from the previous era. A beam of pure white light disintegrated the golem's head before it could land a single blow on Elaine. Utia and Dios shared a look from their hiding spots, overwhelmed by their master's ability to use the dungeon itself as a weapon. Elaine grabbed the Aegis core, feeling its warmth seep through his gloves as the labyrinth began to tremble. The ceiling began to crack, sending large boulders crashing down into the abyss below. He ran toward the exit, his clumsy footsteps somehow avoiding every falling piece of debris. To the watching disciples, it looked like the master was dancing through the destruction with absolute grace. Elaine burst out of the cave entrance just as the mountain behind him settled with a deafening roar. He held the core tightly, convinced that he now had the ultimate shield to protect his lazy lifestyle. Little did he know, his disciples had interpreted his exploration as a signal to seize the surrounding territories. Reports began to spread through the kingdom that the Palacio heir had single-handedly conquered the Labyrinth of Whispers. In the capital, the Magic Tower Masters gathered to discuss the rise of this unexpected genius. A mysterious figure in the corner of the council laughed softly, looking at a portrait of Alan. Elaine returned home to find his mansion surrounded by thousands of kneeling soldiers he didn't recognize. Utia stepped forward, her armor stained with blood, and offered him the crown of a fallen neighboring lord. Elaine's jaw dropped as he realized his simple quest for a shield had started an international war. Far to the north, the ground began to split as the first seal of the Outer God reacted to Alan's new artifact. As Alan reached out to stop Utia, a message from the game system appeared before his eyes, flashing a bright, bloody red. The screen read, "Hidden quest complete, the conquest of the continent has begun." The notification regarding the conquest of the continent flickered before Alan's eyes like a bad omen. He rubbed his temples, wondering if the game system was simply malfunctioning due to his interference with the timeline. Meanwhile, far from the Palacio estate, the capital city of the kingdom buzzed with frantic energy. In the highest chamber of the Imperial Magic Tower, 7 archmages gathered around a crystal ball. The images within the sphere showed the total annihilation of the underworld syndicates by an unknown force. Every clue left behind at the crime scenes pointed to a single symbol, a crescent moon behind a blue veil. The master of the Magic Tower tapped his staff against the floor, his face pale with realization. He concluded that a shadow organization had seized control of the kingdom's entire information network in less than a month. Duke Elgrin, the head of the most powerful noble family, received a report that made his hands tremble. The report identified Alan Palacio, a man known only for his laziness, as the frequent recipient of secret encrypted letters. The Duke realized that every coincidental event in the past year had benefited Alan's interests perfectly. He believed Alan was a genius playing a multi-dimensional game of chess against the entire world. Back at the estate, Alan was currently struggling to peel an orange while lying on his sofa. He decided that since the labyrinth quest was done, he would take a nap for at least 3 days. In the shadows of his room, the shadow-manipulating disciple, Dios, knelt in absolute silence. Dios watched his master sleep and interpreted it as a meditative state to contact higher dimensions. Utia arrived through a hidden portal, carrying a list of the nobles they had recently persuaded to join them. She reported that the kingdom's logistics were now entirely under the control of the Blue Moon. The disciples believed Alan's lazy request for a peaceful life meant they should conquer everything to ensure no one bothered him. They planned to eliminate the Duke of Elgrin next, seeing him as a potential threat to Elaine's peace. Meanwhile, the Duke had already prepared an official envoy to visit Alan, hoping to plead for an alliance. The king himself began to question his advisors about the hidden son of the Palacio family. Rumors spread that Alan had personally slain the Great Labyrinth Guardian with a single breath. Alan woke up from his nap and noticed his bank account had increased by 10 million gold pieces. He assumed it was just high interest from his previous investments in the Merchant Guild. A knock at the door revealed his butler, who looked more terrified than usual. The butler announced that the heads of the 3 great magic towers were waiting in the drawing room. Elaine's heart skipped a beat, thinking he was finally being arrested for his tax evasion strategies. He put on his most expensive robe, intending to act as arrogant as possible to hide his fear. When he entered the room, the archmages immediately stood up and bowed deeply. They offered him the title of Grand Sage Emeritus in exchange for his mercy regarding the magic towers. Elaine accepted the title, thinking it was just a fancy way of saying they wouldn't tax him. The archmages were shocked by his casual demeanor, interpreting it as the absolute confidence of a god. As the wizards left, a shadow darted across the window, unnoticed by Alan. It was an assassin from the Ebon Fang, hired by a rival kingdom to eliminate the rising threat. Before the assassin could even draw breath, Utia appeared directly behind him in a swirl of frost. She whispered that no one was allowed to breathe the same air as her master, with impure intentions. The assassin was frozen solid and shattered into 1,000 pieces before he could scream. Inside, Alan sipped his tea, thinking about how quiet and peaceful his life had finally become. Suddenly, the ground beneath the mansion began to vibrate with a rhythmic, pulsing heat. A message from the system appeared, flashing in a violent shade of crimson. The screen read, "Warning, the seal of the outer god has been weakened by your disciples' actions." Elaine realized that his reformed children hadn't just built an organization, they had accidentally started an apocalypse. Far beneath the earth, a giant eye made of swirling galaxies slowly began to open. Elaine's peaceful life was over, and the true battle for the world's survival was about to begin right in his backyard. The sky above the Palacio estate cracked open like a piece of shattered glass to reveal a void of absolute darkness. A massive eye belonging to an outer god peered through the rift, scanning the mortal world for its next feast. Elaine watched from his balcony, his hand trembling as he spilled his lukewarm tea onto his expensive silk trousers. He realized that the 10-year countdown to the world's end had been cut short by his own interference in the timeline. Utia appeared by his side in a flash of shadow, her twin daggers already drawn and humming with killing intent. She whispered that the time had finally come to execute the Master's ultimate plan for deicide. Elaine wanted to tell her that he didn't have a plan, but his throat was too dry to produce anything but a raspy cough. Dios misinterpreted the cough as a signal and signaled the rest of the Blue Moon organization to begin the ritual. Thousands of hidden agents emerged from the shadows of the estate, their voices chanting Alan's name in a terrifying unison. The outer god let out a roar that vibrated through the very souls of everyone present, turning the sky into a sea of fire. Elaine realized that if he didn't do something, his retirement plans would be incinerated along with the rest of the continent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the legendary artifact he had retrieved from the labyrinth, a small, pulsing crystal. In reality, the crystal was a high-level mana battery, but the disciples believed it was the core of the new world he had promised. As Alan tried to activate the shield function, his foot slipped on the spilled tea, causing him to lunge forward. To the observers below, it looked like their lord was fearlessly leaping into the air to engage the god in direct combat. Elaine screamed in terror, but the sound was drowned out by the sudden explosion of mana as the crystal reacted to his panic. The outer god sensed the massive energy surge and lashed out with 1,000 shadow tentacles. The blue mana shield expanded instantly, vaporizing every shadow limb that dared to touch its surface. Elaine collided with the central eye of the god, the crystal in his hand shattering and releasing its entire storage of power at once. A shockwave of pure logic and order rippled through the chaotic form of the deity, unraveling its existence piece by piece. The dark clouds vanished instantly, replaced by a sky filled with shimmering starlight and a massive glowing blue moon. Elaine fell back toward the ground, his mind completely blank as he prepared for a very painful landing. Before he could hit the earth, the 5 sins leaped upward together, catching him in a web of soft magical energy. They lowered him to his feet, kneeling instantly as the entire army of Blue Moon followed suit. Utia looked up with tears of joy, declaring that their lord had officially ascended to the throne of the world. Elaine looked around at the thousands of fanatics and realized that he was no longer just a noble, but the ruler of a global superpower. He sighed deeply, a sound the disciples interpreted as a profound lament for the fallen state of the universe. Dio stepped forward and presented a crown made of the shattered artifact, forged instantly by his master's leaked mana. He announced that the era of kings was over and the era of the Great Moon had begun. Elaine took the crown, his thoughts already drifting toward how much paperwork this new position was going to require. Yudia promised that the five sins would handle all the trivial matters of world conquest, so he could focus on his divine meditations. For a moment, Alan felt a spark of hope that he might actually get to be lazy after all. However, he saw the lists of traitors they were already preparing to execute, and his hope vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He quickly ordered them to stop all executions, a command they interpreted as him wanting to use the traitors for even more gruesome experiments. Within hours, the news of the Outer Gods' defeat spread across the entire world, striking fear into the hearts of every rival nation. The common people began to build shrines to the Master of the Blue Moon, believing he was their true savior. Alain sat back in his favorite chair on the balcony, watching the first sunrise of his new empire with a heavy sigh. He realized that while he couldn't change the world's misunderstanding of him, he had at least saved everyone he cared about. The five sins stood behind him like eternal guardians, ready to rewrite history according to the whims they thought he had. The story of the lazy noble had ended, and the legend of the eternal mastermind had only just begun.